They aren't your regular white folks who eat at McDonald's or live in the suburbs, nor are they your average UFC fighters who brush off verbal insults and trash talk. Russian UFC fighters are among the scariest, most ruthless, cold-blooded assassins to ever step into the octagon. It's not just about their fighting acumen, but their entire in and out of the octagon behavior, from talking to opponents while smashing them on the canvas to beating fellow competitors backstage just for looking at them the wrong way. Without further ado, let's count down the 10 most ruthless Russian fighters to ever compete in the UFC. Before we begin, keep in mind that the Russian Federation is massive, with multiple republics and diverse ethnicities, so we'll include fighters from all over Russia, from regions like Dagestan and Chechnya to Siberia. This might be the most cold-blooded assassin in UFC bantamweight history. Petr Yan never smiles. You can find pictures of him with his family and friends, yet his facial expression is always the same, stone cold. But the scariest thing? The only time he smiles is when he's hurting people. This Russian doesn't mess around. When Merab Dvalishvili called him a bitch, Petr didn't react with anger, he just stayed calm, repeated the word back while staring at the audience, and then turned to Merab and karate chopped the Georgian straight to the throat. However, his most ruthless performance came against former UFC champion Jose Aldo. It wasn't just a beatdown, it was a torture seminar. As Aldo lay helpless on the canvas, Yan unleashed a barrage of vicious strikes, turning Aldo's head into a target for ballistic missiles. Blood started flowing like the Volga River, and it became one of the hardest moments to watch in UFC history. Thankfully, the referee stepped in to save Aldo, sparing him from spending the night in the emergency room. One look at him is enough to give you nightmares, let alone stepping into the octagon for a fistfight. Sharaputdin Magomedov isn't just the scariest-looking one-eyed pirate in the UFC. His ruthless approach to fighting makes him even more feared, especially considering he's never been defeated. Although he's one of the rare Russians who doesn't rely on wrestling in the octagon, his crisp boxing, thunderous kicks, and overall striking mastery make him a puzzle no one has been able to solve. What he did to Armen Petrosyan in his most recent bout was nothing short of masterful. No other athlete in UFC history has seamlessly switched from one spinning strike to another and knocked an opponent out. Shara was the first to do it. With his vicious knees, Shara cooks his opponent's livers with some fava beans, while his elbows are a story unto themselves. The question is, will he lose his zero anytime soon? You can't talk about the most ruthless Russian fighters in the UFC without mentioning the pound-for-pound great Islam Makhachev. Outside the cage, he's well-behaved and soft-spoken, but once the octagon door closes, he transforms into a monster, mauling opponents before finishing them with airtight submissions. His clinch game has the finesse of a bear hug from a grizzly, combined with leg trips that no one else in the UFC executes quite like him. Once his opponents hit the ground, it's a dead end, as Islam rains down punishment until their spirits break. He's not a fan of trash talk, and he made that clear when Dustin Poirier used the word mother effer to insult him. Since 2011, Makhachev has fought 8 times, and aside from Volkanovski, no opponent has survived his relentless pressure to hear the final bell. His ground control is so suffocating that Drew Dober was forced to tap to shoulder pressure from half guard, a feat only a select few like Islam Makhachev can pull off. They call him Drago for a reason. Alexander Volkov is a 6-foot 7-inch Russian giant whose volume punching makes opponents crumble, leaving nothing but rubble behind. What makes Volkov so ruthless is that he won't knock you out with one shot. Instead, he systematically breaks you down, picking you apart with precision shots that gradually drain your health and stamina. Like every Russian on this list, Drago has little tolerance for messing around. This was evident during his stare-down with Derek Lewis, where the American shoved Volkov's Ushanka. The Russian didn't let it slide. He immediately fired back before staff intervened. Volkov's relentless approach of overwhelming opponents with a barrage of strikes has earned him big wins over MMA greats like Fabricio Verdum and Alistair Overeem. Although he lacks one-punch knockout power, his fighting style has helped him maintain a spot in the UFC heavyweight top 5 for half a decade. Did you know that the fastest submission victory in UFC history isn't Ronda Rousey versus Kat Zingano? The record is actually held by Oleg Taktarov, who thrilled spectators by locking in a submission in just 9 seconds. On July 14, 1995, during the UFC 6 tournament, this old-school Russian faced Anthony Macias. Macias charged straight for a takedown, but Oleg was ready and sent him straight to the gallows. Instead of celebrating, Taktarov looked visibly frustrated. His expression seemed to say, "Come on, suka, I came here for a brawl. My babushka could last longer than that." If that dead stare doesn't send chills down your spine, nothing will. To this day, Oleg's UFC record remains unbroken. He was one of the pioneers who introduced the UFC to the lethal art of Russian Sambo. Often fighting bare knuckle, he used his Sambo skills to dictate where the fight went, unleashing his wrath on anyone unlucky enough to face him. Arguably the second most well-rounded fighter on this list, after Islam Makhachev, Magomed Ankalaev is another Russian on the UFC roster who has zero tolerance for antics. Ion Cutelaba, known for his hot-headed intimidation tactics, tried his usual approach against Ankalaev. Let's just say it didn't go as planned. Magomed is an exceptional striker with a solid wrestling skill set to back it up. He's one of the few UFC fighters to deliver a front kick knockout. The way his kick connected with his opponent's chin is for life. Whether the fight stays standing or goes to the ground, Ankalaev handles it all with ease. From sending fighters like Ion Cutelaba, Anthony Smith, and Johnny Walker on one-way trips to the Dead Sea, to overpowering top-tier opponents like Nikita Krylov, Thiago Santos, and Alexander Rakic, this Dagestani Russian has consistently shown his ability to finish fights or dominate elite contenders with one-sided decisions. The proudest representative of the infamous Dagestani Airlines, who used to terrify his opponents by taking them on a compulsory tour around the octagon, is Rustam Khabilov. It's well known that Russians from this region love to wrestle and dominate their adversaries, but Rustam took that to another level. Making a splash in your first appearance on the big stage is a feat that only a few can pull off, but Khabilov was lucky enough to be an exception. Not only did he win his first UFC bout, but he ruthlessly destroyed poor Vince Pichel, who had no idea what he was getting into. The first moment Rustam secured Pichel's back, he subjected the adversary to a gravity shock treatment. When the opponent got back to his feet, Khabilov gladly served him another meal. But it was the third German suplex, the final straw, that broke the camel's back, and the subsequent onslaught destroyed any hopes of a comeback. Rustam went on a successful run in the UFC, at one point riding a 6-fight winning streak. Although he never captured the belt, he will always be remembered as one of the most relentless Russian fighters to ever compete in the lightweight division. You could say he's the white version of Francis Ngannou, and probably everyone would agree you have a point. Sergei Pavlovich hits like a truck and is definitely not someone who takes prisoners. His goal is always the same: annihilate his opponents as soon as the bell rings. But he's not your average brawler, swinging for the fences and hoping for a decapitation. He's a sniper-precise boxer who picks his shots with surgical precision. From April 2019 to April 2023, this Russian assassin went on a rampage, dismantling all 6 opponents the UFC put in front of him, each within minutes of the first round. While most fighters are terrified of standing toe-to-toe with sluggers like Derek Lewis and Tai Tuivasa, Sergei showed no fear. He stepped into the fire with a bulletproof vest or helmet and traded dynamite on the feet with them. They went swinging, but Sergei's gun proved to be bigger, sending them off to dreamland in the first round. Although Pavlovich is now riding a 2-fight winning streak and finding himself in hot waters, fighting this Russian powerhouse will always be a nightmare for anyone in the UFC's heavyweight division. There is no athlete in the UFC's welterweight or middleweight divisions who isn't terrified of Khamzat Chimaev. With his Assyro-Babylonian beard, lip scar, and the stare of a predator ready to strike, he looks like something straight out of a nightmare. But it's not just his intimidating appearance that makes people fear this Chechen warrior. Chimaev applies wrestling pressure like no other fighter in the UFC. And unlike some wrestlers who are content with simply taking their opponents down and controlling them, Khamzat ruthlessly mauls them on the ground, tearing them apart with relentless shots until they're desperate enough to offer their neck for a submission. This guy loves to smash people. Khamzat holds the record for the quickest turnaround between UFC wins in the modern era, just 10 days. And he's not just a merciless wrestler who drags adversaries into deep waters. His striking is as deadly as a Desert Eagle shot. Don't believe it? Just ask Gerald Meerschaert. Of course, one of the most gangster moments in UFC history happened during Khamzat's fight against Li Jingliang. The Chechen Wolf lifted the unfortunate Li as if he were weightless. In the midst of the chaos, while holding the top contender in his arms, Khamzat casually chatted with UFC President Dana White. All of this happened before he slammed Li onto the canvas for a signature mauling session. Khamzat Chimaev is a fighter who delivers ruthless moments for a living, and to this day, no one in the world has managed to defeat this monster. And yes, you guessed it. How could you create a list of the most ruthless Russians in the UFC without mentioning Khabib Nurmagomedov? Let's just say he's as skilled a wrestler as Islam Makhachev or Khamzat Chimaev, maybe even better. But what made Khabib so unique and terrifying was his ruthlessness in pursuing victory, which even included talking to his opponents while smashing their heads off the canvas. It wasn't just his relentless fighting style. His trash talk was just as merciless. Who else would dare to trash talk in an arena packed with Irish fans? Only Khabib. Speaking of Irishmen, Khabib displayed his cold-blooded nature in his fight against Conor McGregor. Everyone knows Conor got under Khabib's skin in the lead-up to the fight, but the Russian stayed calm, patiently waiting to let his actions speak louder than words. And that's exactly what happened. When the cage door closed, Khabib unleashed punishment from the top position, while demanding that McGregor talk now as he tortured him in front of millions. Nobody had ever done that to Conor before, but as the saying goes, when you mess with the bull, you get the horns. Nurmagomedov smashed through 29 opponents effortlessly, without ever tasting defeat in his professional career, cementing his status as one of the greatest competitors to ever step foot in the octagon. And what about you, UFC fans? Who do you think is the most ruthless Russian who ever fought in the UFC? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more MMA content like this.